from orbit. In about 4.5 hours, 2 astronauts from the U.S.-based shuttle Endeavour are going to be going on the first of about 75 spacewalks that will be needed to build a new International Space Station. CNN's Tony Clark is at the Johnson Space Center preparing to cover the first of these walks. Tony, what's up?
Well, Jim, you know, the last couple of days have been really spectacular as the 2 space station modules have been connected, but today promises to be even more spectacular. The astronauts were awakened about a half hour ago. They are up, finishing breakfast, and getting ready for work. Endeavour's astronauts were awakened around 12:30 Eastern Time this afternoon and are preparing for a busy day of space station construction.
Denver, top of the morning to you. That was a Celtic.
With the first 2 components of the space station locked together and standing like a 7-story building in the shuttle's payload bay, the next step is to join the 2 systems electronically during the first of 3 spacewalks.
You can see Jerry and Jim doing their...
Jerry Ross and Jim Newman will spend 6 hours outside the shuttle connecting a series of cables between the 2 modules.
It's some jumper cables and some plugs that we'll be putting on the various different connector points on the outside of the node. And Jim will be disconnecting the cables that have been launched in place on the outside of the node.
The astronauts have spent hours practicing the maneuvers in NASA's water tank, which simulates the weightlessness of space. Ross says his biggest concern is that the cables are connected properly.
I think the trickiest part that we've got is to make sure that we have very carefully inspected both mating halves of each connector to make sure there's no debris that was shaken loose during launch and has lodged itself in the pins or the sockets.
The spacewalkers say their job is not so much physically demanding as it is time-consuming. NASA ground controllers call it perhaps the most complicated spacewalk ever attempted. About 2 hours from now, Jerry Ross and Jim Newman will start donning their spacesuits, and then about 4 hours from now, they will step outside the shuttle Endeavour to begin what is expected to be about 6.5 hours of work connecting those 2 space station modules. Jim?
All right, Tony Clark there keeping an eye on the shuttle mission. Should be an interesting day for everyone involved. Charlotte?
The crew of the shuttle Endeavour is preparing for their first spacewalk. CNN's Tony Clark joins us now live from Johnson Space Center in Texas, and he has this update on the crew's mission.
Charlotte, the crew is well underway getting ready for the spacewalk that's set to begin in just about half an hour. Right now, Jerry Ross and Jim Newman are in their spacesuits, and they are doing what is called pre-breathing. They're breathing pure oxygen so that they can get ready for the change in pressure when they go outside in the spacesuit's pressure. Just a short time ago, we saw a scene from one of the shuttle's payload bay cameras, and it was just at a time when Nancy Curry, one of the astronauts, was getting ready to power up the shuttle's robot arm. That will be used to lift Ross to various portions of the space station to get him to various heights, because you know that space station tower is almost like a 7-story building. The astronauts were awakened around noon Eastern Time today, and they quickly got ready for work. Endeavour's astronauts were awakened around 12:30 Eastern Time this afternoon and are preparing for a busy day of space station construction.
Endeavour, top of the morning to you.
With the first are in their spacesuits, they are doing what is called pre-breathing pure oxygen to get them ready for going out for the spacewalk. By pre-breathing the pure oxygen, it prevents them from getting what is commonly known as the bends. They will be leaving the shuttle's hatch at just a little less than half an hour from now. The spacewalk itself set to last about 6.5 hours. Charlotte?
Tony, you mentioned there in your report that this is being said to be one of the most dangerous spacewalks ever undertaken. What are some of the risks, and how have they prepared for those potential dangers?
Well, I'm not sure about danger as so much as complex, and it's because there are so many cables that have to be connected, so many tasks that have to be performed. There are some 40 umbilical cables that have to be connected, and they have to be moved. Astronaut Jerry Ross will be working near the top of the Zarya module, or high up on the Zarya module, standing on the end of the robot arm. And so it's simply a very difficult and very time-consuming task. But it is also one that these astronauts have choreographed. They have rehearsed time and time again, and so we expect everything to go smoothly.
CNN's Tony Clark at the Johnson Space Center in Texas. Thanks for joining us.
U.S. Space Shuttle Endeavour are getting ready to electronically link elements of the International Space Station. These are live pictures here that you see. Earlier, there was a spacewalk that lasted about 6 hours. They're going to be connecting power cables between the Russian and U.S.-made sections of this space station.
Live pictures from the Space Shuttle Endeavour. This is the way it looks as astronauts continue construction on the first parts of an international space station. CNN's Tony Clark joins us from the Johnson Space Center in Texas with more on this mission, which includes one of the most complicated spacewalks ever attempted. Tony?
Judy, in fact, this is the first of what will be 3 spacewalks done by Jim Newman and Jerry Ross, the 2 spacewalking astronauts. And both of them say that of the 3, this is the most complicated. It is about a 6.5-hour spacewalk to connect the umbilicals between the new space station modules. And right now, what you're seeing is Ross and Newman. You're seeing Newman floating in the background, and Ross is on the end of the shuttle's robot arm. And what they are doing now is getting set up for getting all the tools set up, getting the tethers. This is a view from the camera that is on the remote arm, and you'll see Jim Newman down there at the very bottom working to set everything up. David Wolf is an astronaut who is joining me right now. They're going through the procedures themselves. They haven't actually started connecting anything on board the space station.
That's right, Tony. It's a fairly extensive job, just getting all the tools laid out, the foot restraints to help you stay in position, essentially staging for the whole operation.
One of the things that we've been seeing, they're working in gloves like you have there. How difficult is it to operate and manipulate? Because you've got one of the tethers there, one of the key first items that has to be set up.
Of course, it's pretty important. This end is attached to the spacecraft, the slide wires, and you have to work it with the glove. Of course, you don't want it to come open too easy. And this end to the astronaut. And this is your tether reel. This glove is blown up with 4 or 5 pounds of pressure. That's enough to make it very hard to move, and quite a bit of stress on your forearm.
And setting up the tethers is an important first step for the astronauts, anyone that steps out in the payload bay.
That's right. We don't want to get loose.
And is that a real concern for the astronauts, the possibility of that?
I would say it's the #1 concern. All our training centers on not coming loose, but of course the job is to get the space station constructed, all the power and data cables connected. But we keep that #1 in our mind.
Right now we see Jerry Ross. There's a good shot of Jerry Ross on the end of the shuttle's robot arm. How difficult is it for essentially the choreographing between Nancy Curry, who is operating the arm, and Jerry to get him in the right place?
That's right. This is really choreographed between people on the ground, Nancy Curry running the robot arm, Rick inside with the checklist, and both of the 2 crew members outside doing a very careful choreograph of connecting cables, both power and data, motion, precision, to the inch motion. Nancy Curry uses all her helicopter piloting skill from the Army to do very precise movements of that arm, just as she used when docking the components.
One of the things we see if we look at Jerry Ross on the end of the arm is there is a stand in front of him with a lot of what appears to be equipment in front. What is that?
That's right. That's a tool stanchion. And instead of going back and forth to the airlock and bringing all the various tools he will need to conduct the rest of this spacewalk, we take them with us as we go around, and that's essentially your work site, portable work site.
Now, he is tethered, I assume, to the arm itself, to that stanchion there?
That's right. He has transferred tethers. He first came out onto the shuttle slide wire, then switched over to a tether on the arm.
And then Jim Newman is off on the right-hand side of the screen. What does it appear he's doing?
Jim Newman is preparing his work site, bringing equipment to where he will need it on the pressurized mating adapter, where he has just gone to this moment. That's the adapter between the space shuttle and the Unity node above in the top of the screen.
And I think if we look at Newman to kind of by his right hand, we see the tether connector. It looks like just like you were showing us.
That's right. That's his tether reel, and he keeps that continually under surveillance for its integrity.
One of the things that the astronauts are doing, the primary function of this spacewalk, is to connect 40 different umbilicals, and you can see the various cables going around, and it is to get Unity and Zarya both operating together, essentially thinking together.
Exactly. Their computers will become one mind. The power will come from the solar arrays on Zarya and flow into Unity. Command will come from a United States Control Center and the Russian Control Center through antennas, which will be installed in the next EVA 2 days from now. We're really seeing a space station come together in front of our eyes.
One of the things that we have seen is the training that they've had in the water tank. How realistic does that show what it's going to be like for them in space?
Typical, Tony, of spaceflight, it takes different simulators to capture all we need. Underwater, we capture the spatial orientation. You can go upside down, but you can't operate the space suit as the spacecraft it is in a vacuum in zero gravity. We go in vacuum chambers, we go in zero gravity airplanes, and it's up to the team and the astronaut to synthesize this all into the event they're doing now in actual spaceflight.
I think for the layman, one of the things that comes immediately to mind, you have astronauts that have been in these space suits for at least the last couple of hours before going out into the payload bay. They will work for another 6.5 hours out there and still be in them when they come back in. How do they eat or drink or have anything just to keep their energy up for working this long?
That's a good point. It's hard work in a spacesuit. It's one of the hardest things an astronaut does. They have a water bag, about 1.5 quarts, 2 quarts of water. They have a candy bar, and they have a conventional diaper.
How dangerous is this kind of work?
Well, spaceflight in general has to be taken seriously. It's unforgiving of small mistakes, and that goes for spacewalking also. It has to be done exactly right.
And so that's why we have we've seen the tethers and everything else. And in fact, one of the things they will be checking out on the third spacewalk is what is called the SAFER system. What is that?
That's right. The SAFER is essentially the aid for rescue, simplified aid for rescue. It's a jetpack that is on the spacesuit. If we should become unattached from the space station, no shuttle present that could maneuver to get us, we can essentially fly ourselves back with a limited amount of propellant or fuel.
And that's something that has been tried before, tested on other flights, but it's being kind of the final test, I guess, this time.
That's right. We've redesigned some valves for higher reliability, and Jerry will be doing a test of that jetpack at the end of this spacewalk. We're also building one to fit the Russian spacesuit. We will operate both Russian and American spacesuits from the space station.
One of the things that some of the astronauts have talked about is that there are often no surprises, or rarely a surprise when they get out there. The training, the lengthy training, tells them to anticipate everything?
I think that we have had our share of surprises, actually, in the business. The training is extensive, but we always have to wonder what we haven't thought of, and that's what comes up to bite us. So we train extensively. We've gotten through them all, though.
David Wolf, thank you very much. Of course, we will be watching the spacewalk. It's expected to last a total of 6.5 hours, and so we will keep you updated. Judy?
All right. Tony Clark, Dave Wolf, thank you both. You know, looking at that panoramic background, they could be anywhere, but when you see the background, it's the planet Earth. You're reminded of just where they are.
Well, a long commute, but they're finally at the job site now. They're floating high above us. Jerry Ross and Jim Newman, those astronauts, are busy connecting electrical power cables between the first two modules of the International Space Station. And the good news, of course, is if they do drop a tool, it won't go very far. Tony Clark is at the Houston Johnson Space Center. He's been following what is, I'm sure, the most watched construction site anywhere at any time. Tony, tell us about it.
Well, you know, Lou, they are some 242 miles above Earth. In fact, right now they're above the southern tip of South America, doing their work, helping build an international space station. What you're seeing right now is the remote manipulator arm, the robot arm, and there at the very end is Jerry Ross. And what you can see on the right-hand side is essentially his workstation. It is a pole, a stanchion with a series of tools that he will use to try and connect some 40 umbilicals between the U.S.-built and the Russian-built space station modules. This is about a 6.5-hour-long spacewalk that's planned. It is packed with work because what they have to do, he and Jim Newman, who is the other spacewalking astronaut, have to disconnect a variety of cables that were secured during launch and then connect them to the proper points so that they can get these modules operating.
Tony, how long have they been out there now?
It's not quite 2 hours, but you know, the first part of their work is simply setting up the tools, getting the tethers, getting them tied down correctly so that they don't drift away. What we're seeing now are some shots of some of the connectors. At the bottom was the, right now at the top is the Unity module, the American-built Unity module. And we've seen some of the preparations for work. Nancy Curry operates that remote arm, and she tries to move Ross to the proper position so that he can begin connecting the variety of cables. It is slow work, but you know, the view, if he ever gets a chance to look around, has got to be tremendous up there, Lou.
Tremendous. And will there be any other effort required, any other project, the electrical, they're playing, if you will, electrician on this particular spacewalk. Will they have to do any more in connecting these modules?
There are 3 spacewalks in all that are planned over this mission. This is the one that is devoted to connecting the umbilicals, getting the computers running so they can turn on the space station nodes. And because there are so many, they say that they've got to get them simply one right after the other quickly. Their biggest concern is that some of the pins in the connectors may be bent by debris. And so Jerry Ross has said that he's got to check both ends of those very carefully before he tries to connect them so he doesn't break off a connector. The closest hardware store is quite a ways away.
Tony, thank you very much. Tony Clark reporting from the Houston, from the Johnson Space Center in Houston. Again, terrific pictures coming to us from the Endeavour as Jerry Ross and Jim Newman put together the first 2 components of the International Space Station. Well, coming up next on the News Hour,
one of the most difficult spacewalks ever is underway. We begin with what astronauts are about halfway through the first spacewalk of this mission, a spacewalk NASA is calling the most complicated ever attempted. The astronauts are working to connect components of the International Space Station. They are trying to join the Russian Zarya power plant with the US-built Unity. This is the first of 3 scheduled spacewalks. When finished, the orbiting outpost will be the most expensive scientific undertaking ever. And that's it for now. Stay tuned for Asian Edition.
Connectors, you can see Nancy Curry moving them effortlessly around on the end of the ISS. And she becomes almost a conscious part of his mind as he works through these tasks. And sometimes all he has to do is say a word or two, and Nancy can move him right there. And the teamwork here is very smooth. And the practice.
6th anniversary of the Apollo 17 moon launch, the final mission to the lunar surface. U.S. Customs officials marked a date by seizing a souvenir from that trip, an authentic moon rock. CNN's Mark Potter explains.
It may be hard to believe that this tiny rock, weighing barely more than a gram, was offered to undercover agents for $5 million. But at a news conference, officials from Customs, the Postal Service, and NASA said that was the asking price for this nearly 4 billion-year-old piece of the lunar surface. Agents say the rock was confiscated near Miami from a man who kept it in a safety deposit box in this bank. He said he bought it from an official in Honduras.
He's identified only by saying a former Honduran military officer, retired military officer.
Indeed, in 1973, the rock was given to the Honduran government by President Richard Nixon. Astronauts aboard Apollo 17 collected the rock on the last mission to the moon. It was part of a larger rock that was broken apart and shared with a number of countries.
We hope that this will be a symbol of what our feelings are, what the feelings of the Apollo program are, and a symbol of mankind that we can live in peace and harmony in the future.
Customs agents seized the rock because it wasn't declared when brought into the country, and say they will return it to Honduras.
The investigation began with agents placing a newspaper ad asking to buy moon rocks. They actually were trying to catch scam artists selling fake ones. The last thing they ever expected to get was a real moon rock. Mark Potter, CNN, Miami.
Up the first components on the International Space Station. President Bill Clinton's lawyers map out their defense strategy as they prepare to make their case at impeachment hearings. And Israel's Prime Minister escapes a parliamentary attempt to call for new elections days ahead of President Clinton's visit to the region. We begin in outer space. Crew members of the shuttle Endeavour are connecting the first two pieces of the International Space Station. Things appear to be going smoothly for the two-man crew. CNN's Miles O'Brien joins us now live from the Johnson Space Center with the latest. Miles.
Leon, the spacewalk is now about 5 hours old, and the astronauts in space are way ahead of schedule, so far ahead that they have completed all the tasks which were considered primary tasks for this particular spacewalk, and they are doing things that are so-called get-ahead items. They're putting on additional handholds and tool connections which will be placed on the fledgling International Space Station. Let's look at some live pictures from space right now. The astronauts in a nighttime pass right now, which lasts about 45 minutes. The temperature right now outside those suits is about 200 degrees below 0 Fahrenheit. That's astronaut Jerry Ross using lights which are attached to his helmet. His feet are attached to a foothold which is at the end of the shuttle's robotic arm. He's working with a power socket driver and I guess drill, although it isn't used for drilling, it's used for tightening up nuts and bolts on the exterior of the International Space Station. Right now they're putting on some handholds which will be used on later missions. Later astronauts will use them as they conduct their work down the road. There will be in all 162 spacewalks necessary at least to build this International Space Station, which when it is complete will be the length of a football field and will have the volume of a 747 airliner and will weigh nearly 1 million pounds. This spacewalk was a difficult one, but the astronauts made it look easy. They put together 40 separate connectors, data and power lines, which connect this entire fledgling embryonic space station. Looking at some pictures from earlier, you see astronaut Jerry Ross at the end of that robotic arm on that foot restraint, doing a lot of work, doing some of those connecting tasks, which would be fairly easy here on Earth, but are made difficult by the fact that those cables become very stiff when the temperature plummets, as it does every 45 minutes. There you see astronaut Jim Newman, who attached a slide wire along the Unity module, which is the first U.S. piece of the International Space Station. That's what the astronauts will be attaching tethers to, and that allows them to work safely without becoming hopelessly lost and unattached from the vehicle. This is something that is of concern as they consider all these spacewalks, because the International Space Station will be so large it cannot go retrieve an astronaut who, for whatever reason, tumbles away from the space station while working. There you see Jim Newman doing his work as well. Once again, this work continued over 4.5 hours without any difficulty. And as we approach the 5-hour mark, let's go back to some live pictures, and you can see Jerry Ross continuing his work as he attaches those footholds. NASA couldn't be happier with all of this. This has gone very well so far. And as a matter of fact, let me show you exactly what they're doing in space. Using a very thick glove, which makes, of course, things very difficult. And it's a pressurized glove, so it's a lot like trying to keep a balloon flexed. They are taking connectors like this and attaching them. The connectors this particular one is a data connector. It has a lot of pins, as you can see. And it gets connected like this, and then the astronaut has to push down on the bail there to make it connect. They do that 40 times, and it was done fairly easily. Each of those connectors is unique, so in theory, it's impossible for them to attach the wrong cable to the wrong connector. So that's the first of 3 spacewalks which are planned for this first construction mission for the International Space Station. There'll be more as the week progresses, and we'll be bringing them to you live as they occur. Leon?
Miles, you look so skillful with that space glove. Perhaps NASA should be recruiting you.
Maybe
one
so.
question, NASA did describe this as one of the riskiest, or the riskiest spacewalk ever. What's so risky about it?
Well, it's probably not the riskiest spacewalk ever. It's a challenging spacewalk. What makes it difficult is there were a lot of connectors that had to be connected. And it's just like anything. If you look at this closely, you'll see that it has a series of pin connections there. I don't know if you can really see in there very well, but the bottom line is if anybody who's connected a computer knows what it's like when there are 24 pins to connect inside a computer. It's very easy to bend one of those pins. Well, if you bend one of those pins at your house, it's very easy to go to the computer store and get a new connection. When you're in space, not so easy. Fortunately, all these cables are redundant. For every connector that they put in, there's another one that performs the same job. As a result, if they did bend a pin up there, the space station would still operate, and then perhaps on a follow-on mission, they would replace that cable. So it's definitely a risky type of thing in that sense, but as far as spacewalks go, it's not the most difficult spacewalk ever attempted.
Okay, Miles O'Brien, thank you very much indeed. Concluding the first spacewalk of this mission, the 2 are completing what NASA calls the most complicated spacewalk ever, connecting components of 2 parts of the International Space Station. The astronauts will make 2 more spacewalks on this mission.
Schools, bumper-to-bumper traffic, things like that, and the impact on the environment. So we call the series Sprawl America, and it runs the week of January 4th.
All right. Now, before we say goodbye, a quick update on the scientific sprawl going on in space. Endeavour's astronauts successfully connected the first 2 building blocks of the International Space Station, linking the Russian control module with the American-built chamber called Unity. Now, the stage is set for a spacewalk later today when astronauts will attach all the electrical cables between the 2 components. Be sure to watch CNN for all the developments.
Yep, and that's it. We'll see you guys tomorrow.
See ya.
Astronauts perform a complex feat of construction on the International Space Station. Space history, hooking up 40 electrical connections on the International Space Station. CNN's Miles O'Brien is standing by at Johnson Space Center with the latest on the construction project. Miles.
Fiona, the first shift of work on the International Space Station is just about complete, and so far things have gone nearly flawlessly. For astronauts Jerry Ross and Jim Newman have been out there about 6 hours now, and as you said, they successfully connected 40 cables, that is, communications and power connections, which will connect the 2 pieces of that International Space Station which exist, the U.S.-made Unity docking node and the Russian-made Zarya propulsion and communications control module. Now, you're looking at astronaut Jerry Ross, who was operating from the end of the shuttle's robotic arm using a foothold at that end. The foothold moved him all around the 77-foot fledgling International Space Station as he connected those cables. Beneath him there, in that picture, you'll see astronaut Jim Newman, who is assisting him in untangling the spaghetti mess of cables and putting them together properly, making sure the right connector went into the right socket. As we said, all that went off without a hitch. As a matter of fact, they've been training 2.5 years for this, and they were clearly ready, so ready that they were way ahead of their time schedule and started doing some additional work. Now, in the course of doing that additional work, they were putting some sockets on the exterior of the International Space Station, sockets which will hold footholds for future spacewalks. One of those sockets got away from astronaut Jerry Ross. It floated near the shuttle for some time, but apparently is out of harm's way, will not cause any problems to either the shuttle or the International Space Station. Now, ground controllers in Moscow and Houston tested out those cable connections. It turns out that all 40 of those cables are working properly. The power and the communications is working properly both in Zarya and in the U.S. portion, Unity. So this International Space Station is actually juiced up and flowing now and is going on its way toward a project which will take 5 years to complete, and when it's done, will weigh nearly 1 million pounds in orbit. This is the most complicated of the 3 spacewalks scheduled for this, the first construction mission of the International Space Station. But as you look ahead toward the 161 other spacewalks planned, this one will actually be relatively simple. Fiona?
And Miles, as you say, it's being called the most complicated spacewalk ever. What makes it so complex?
Well, there have been complicated spacewalks in the past. The Hubble repair missions, you may recall, the Hubble Space Telescope, those spacewalks were particularly complicated. It's complicated in the sense that there was a lot to do in a little bit of time. It's obviously a very exacting thing, and of course it's a risky thing as well. The astronauts out there in what are essentially tiny spacecraft, and any time that there's the possibility that there could be a tear, it could cause serious problems, could cause sudden death for an astronaut. So a spacewalk is a tricky endeavor, a risky endeavor, and it's always complicated because it's always carefully choreographed.
Okay, Miles, thank you for that. Miles O'Brien with an update for us from the Johnson Space Center. Our headlines. A pair of US astronauts have just finished hooking up electricity to the new space station. They ran connections from the American-built segment all the way up to the top of the Russian module. That's about 21 meters of wiring. But the astronauts worked so quickly, they finished the job a couple of hours ahead of schedule.
After years of preparation and delay, the International Space Station is finally taking shape as it orbits around the Earth. 2 astronauts aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour have linked the first crucial wiring connections. CNN's Miles O'Brien is standing by at the Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, with the very latest. Good morning, Miles.
Good morning, Bettina. The astronauts have done such a good job on their first shift as orbiting construction workers that they're actually doing some extra work as we speak right now. They finished their tasks that they had to get done in their first spacewalk with about an hour extra time left over. And you're looking right now at some pictures of the astronauts on outside the 77-foot-high combination of the U.S. Unity and the Russian-made Zarya. What they were doing toward the end of the spacewalk was checking on a stuck antenna, which is on the Zarya module. That stuck antenna would be used to dock future unmanned freighters, which would arrive at the Unity. And those docking antenna may be unstuck by these astronauts. Engineers are trying to figure out what, if anything, these astronauts will do about that. Right now, the astronauts are removing some thermal covers from some computers on board Zarya. The reason that they don't need those thermal covers anymore is that the Zarya has been fired up, power is running through it, and the heaters which would keep those computers thermally protected are now operating. The reason that the power is on is the astronauts, you'll see Jerry Ross there, right there at the end of the robotic arm of the shuttle doing his work. Those astronauts successfully connected 40 cables, power and data cables over the course of this spacewalk. Those connections went off without a hitch. It was a tricky maneuver because each of the connections had several pins in them, in particular the data connections. The concern was if they were to bend a pin or improperly connect something, they would have a problem. But so far, so good. And the International Space Station, according to ground controllers, is operating as it should. Unity talking to Zarya, Zarya talking to Unity, power flowing back and forth, and data and communications going well. We're told now that Jerry Ross, who you see there right at the end of that shuttle's robotic arm on his 5th spacewalk, has broken a U.S. record, extending beyond 29 hours and 41 minutes, the previous record set by astronaut Tom Akers. So a good spacewalk for Jerry Ross and Jim Newman, and for NASA, a good first step as it begins the long road toward the construction of this International Space Station. Bettina?
Sounds, of course, very impressive. Give us a sense for how difficult such a job is physically. How hard is it for the astronauts, for example, to work with the tools?
Well, the astronauts tell me the most difficult thing is having good forearm strength, because you're using a glove which is inflated with a certain amount of pressure. And every time they move that glove, it's like squeezing on a rubber ball. And at the end of a mission, their forearms and their fingers are very tired. It's also very mentally draining, as you might suspect. Every astronaut I've spoken with says a spacewalk which would last 7 or perhaps even 8 hours goes by very quickly as they're concentrating on the task at hand.
Thank you very much, Miles. CNN's Miles O'Brien reporting on the very latest from the Space Shuttle Endeavour. Thank you.
Space history by completing the first electrical connections on the International Space Station. During a 4-hour spacewalk, they successfully connected the power cables between the Russian and US-made sections of the station. The astronauts finished the complicated task ahead of schedule. One of the astronauts rode on Endeavour's robotic arm to connect the cables, while a mission specialist operated the device from inside the shuttle. About 75 spacewalks will be required during the 5-year construction of the space station.